Resourceful Designer, episode 217, Cutting Through the Jargon.
Welcome to the Resourceful Designer podcast, offering solutions to streamline your graphic and web design business so you can get back to designing. And now, your host. When he takes walks in the woods, he imagines he's a Dungeons & Dragons character. Mark Descote.
Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for tuning in. If this is your first time listening to Resourceful Designer, I appreciate you, and I hope you enjoy the episode. And if you're a long-time listener, can I ask you a favor? Would you be willing to leave a rating and review for the podcast in Apple Podcasts? If so, please visit resourcefuldesigner.com/Apple Podcasts, where you can leave your rating and review, and I thank you for it. Now, in this week's episode, I'm going to share why you should choose your words carefully, and I'm also going to share a resource to help you choose color palettes for your next design project. Now, what have I been up to? Well, I finally launched a website for a client that I've been working on for a bit, so it was nice to get that one finalized and launched. Also got approval on 2 more podcast cover arts, as well as received 3 new orders for podcast cover arts. A lot of people during these COVID-19 times are deciding to start podcasts and reaching out for artwork, so getting lots of orders there. I also terminated a client this week. This was a client, they paid for some work in advance. Everything was going smoothly at first, and then all of a sudden I stopped hearing from them. I sent them a first round of proofs. They asked for some revisions. When I sent them back a second round of proofs with the revised content, I never heard back from them again. And after 2 months, I sent them a message just inquiring where things were. Then at 2.5 months, I sent them another one, warning them that if I don't hear back from them by a certain date, that I will just mark the project as terminated, and they will lose the deposit, the money they paid me up front. And if they do want anything else, they would have to place a new order with me. And I never heard back from them. So I gave them an extra week just for good measure. But then I sent them an email saying that the project has been terminated and any future work will require a new order. So I guess it happens. At least I was paid for it. This was all paid in advance. So the client paid me but never got anything from me. And according to my contract, I don't have to return any of the money because of the way it was handled. So do you have a stipulation like that in your contract? A clause stating that if a client goes silent for a certain amount of time, you can terminate the project and not worry about anything? Because what you don't want to happen is a client goes silent and then a year or 2 down the road come back and say, hey, I want this work finished now. If you don't have it in your contract, you'll be obliged to do so. So that was an interesting part of my week. And finally, I got my new to me laptop. My daughter finally got her new MacBook Pro. She's playing around with it. And I took hers, formatted the hard drive, installed my stuff on it. Actually, I'm still in the process of installing some stuff on it. But I'll be fooling around this week or this weekend with my laptop, just trying to get accustomed to it. I'm not used to the trackpad. So that's the way my week's been so far. Now, there's been a lot of things going on in the Resourceful Designer community. We had Sierra join the community this week, and she took part, along with Katie, who joined last week. Sierra and Katie took part in their very first video chat this week, and we had a lot of people. We had almost half the community show up for this video chat. We moved the weekly meetings. I had mentioned previous on the podcast how we were doing Monday morning meetings. Well, I guess Monday mornings weren't easy for a lot of people, so we decided to move them to Thursday afternoons. Nobody wanted to do them on a Friday, so Thursday afternoon, we're kind of doing a catch-up meeting, seeing how the week's been, what's happening over the weekend, and getting ready for the following week. And so far, we had a great turnout, had a great conversation, went over an hour. Normally, these things are an hour, but we went a little bit over an hour just because the conversation was going so well. And it just helps us bond as community members, get to know each other, get the new members to know the older members, and the old squad to know the new members. And that way, when we are talking in the Slack group, like Katie shared a branding project that she's working on, and she was asking for critiques. Well, now she can put a face to the people who are sending her their suggestions or comments, and vice versa. We know who is submitting the logo for our critiques. So far, Katie and Sierra are enjoying the community just like everyone else is a member, and we would love to have you as part of it as well. If you're interested in becoming a member of the Resourceful Designer community, visit resourcefuldesigner.com/community. And now this week's resource of the week. And this week's resource is the website coolers.co. Now, if you're a longtime listener, you know that I've talked about this one before. I've even shared it as a resource of the week, but it's worth mentioning again. Coolers.co, which is COOLORS.co, is a super fast color scheme generator. It creates a color palette for you, and it creates 5 colors. And if you like certain colors, you could lock them. And then you just press your space bar. And every time you press the space bar, it chooses colors that complement the ones you had locked. So if you have 1 color locked, it'll produce another 4. And if you have 4 colors locked, it'll keep going through that last color to find complementary colors or colors that work well with the other ones you've chosen. And using this site, you can create beautiful color schemes that always work well together. That's what I love about it. Now, it also allows you to pick colors from uploaded images. So if you have a photo, say a client has a certain photo you want to use on the website, you can upload that photo and Coolers will pick the most appropriate color palette based on that photo, which is very, very useful. You can also adjust things and refine colors by temperature, by hue, by saturation, brightness, and so much more. And you can save your palettes for future use. I have every palette that I've created for my clients saved in my Coolers account. They display on the right-hand side there. I can look back and see all the colors, including variations. Some clients, I might try variations and see which one, and then I can delete the ones I end up not using, but it's a very handy feature. Now, they also offer an iOS and an Android app, as well as an Adobe add-on for both Photoshop and Illustrator that allows you to display your palettes right in the program. So you don't have to go back and forth between the website. You can see your color palettes directly in Adobe Illustrator or Photoshop. So because of this and the great features, Coolers is a website I use on a regular basis for choosing color palettes, mostly for my website works, but I've used it before for print design as well, and I highly suggest you check it out. Once again, the website is coolers.co, and that's COOLORS. And now, cutting through the jargon. Pixels, bleed, Wordmark, hero image, SSL, white space. I imagine that as I said each of those words, your mind immediately thought of either the meaning of the word or the use of it, how that word is put into use. For you, deciphering these words takes up the same amount of brain power as if I had said eggs, horse, car, or house. You don't have to burn any brain calories thinking of them because they're second nature to you. That's because you're familiar with the jargon in our industry. And that's a good thing. You wouldn't be much good as a designer if you didn't know what a pixel was or a bleed or a wordmark. But we deal on a daily basis with people who are not in our industry. That's why they hire us, after all, because of our creativity and our knowledge of all things design. But sometimes that knowledge can become a bit of a crutch, especially when dealing with clients who don't know what it is that we know. Yesterday, I had a Zoom chat with a new podcast cover artwork client. Now, this gentleman that I met with is in his mid-80s, and he's starting a podcast. And he's going to talk about the commonalities between creationism in religion and in science. Pretty heavy topic there. Now, he's a retired professor of quantum physics with a deep knowledge of string theory. And let me tell you, some of the things he was trying to explain to me about his topic and his podcast were whoosh, way over my head. I didn't understand half the things he was telling me, but he sure had a passion for his topic. Now, I'm telling you this to illustrate that this man, he's no dummy. Some may even consider him a genius. And you may be thinking that, sure, he was using jargon that I didn't understand because I'm not a quantum physicist. But I'm actually telling this from the other point of view. During our discussion about his podcast cover artwork, he stopped me to question what a pixel was. He told me that he had read many places how podcast cover art should be 3,000 pixels by 3,000 pixels square. And he said he was unfamiliar with the term. Now, he surmised that a pixel is a form of measurement, But he had no idea how big or how small a pixel was, because in his vast knowledge of the inner workings of our universe, pixels had never come up. And this just goes to show you that even the brightest minds don't know everything, and nor should they. Now, maybe you're saying, but Mark, this guy, you said he was in his mid-80s, so maybe that's understandable. However, most people these days knows what a pixel is. And I'll concede that point. I too believe that most people in the world know what a pixel is. However, you ask a non-designer how long 300 pixels is, how wide or how high, and they probably couldn't give you an answer, or if they do, it'll be way off. You, on the other hand, probably can make a fairly accurate guess on how long 300 pixels is. If I told you to hold your fingers 300 pixels apart, I'm sure you'd be within the very close vicinity of an actual 300 pixels. And that's because you're familiar with them. You work with pixels on a daily basis, so you should know approximately how long or how high 300 pixels is. Okay, that's enough about pixels. What I'm getting at is jargon is a great way for us to learn, for us to share information and to communicate with our peers, and for us to instruct the next generation of designers. But jargon has no place when communicating with our clients unless you explain what it is you mean. For example, I never tell a client that I'm going to install an SSL certificate on their website. Most people have no idea what that is. Instead, I tell my clients that I'm installing a security certificate. And then I go on to explain in terms they can understand what a security certificate does. I tell them that it encrypts the communication between a visitor's browser and their website. So when a browser and a website are exchanging information, it's as if that information was put into a sealed envelope before being sent off to the other one. And nobody can see what's in that envelope until it reaches the other destination and it's opened. Without a security certificate, all that information that goes back and forth, it's as if it was written on just notepaper that everyone can see as it's being passed around. And when explained in those terms, a client can understand the importance of an SSL certificate without knowing the jargon or any of it. They got the gist. They understand what they need to know. So when you're talking with your clients, be conscious of the terminology that you're using. And if you need to use jargon, make sure the client understands what you're saying. Maybe if you're talking about a logo with them, you can say, I'm thinking that a Wordmark would really suit your brand. Do you know what I mean when I say Wordmark? Never presume that your client knows what you're saying. Give them a chance to learn during the process by asking them if they understand, and they'll appreciate you and trust you more for it. Now, of course, we're not the only ones guilty of this. Clients are guilty of using jargon as well, especially when they're dealing with their own clients or customers. Industry speak, another word for jargon, can be seen in marketing material everywhere. It usually mucks up the message it's trying to relay. Your job as a designer isn't to create pretty designs for your clients. It's to ensure your designs tell a precise and accurate message, a message that provides the solution for your clients. One of my clients is a chiropodist. If you're not sure what that is, in essence, it's a foot doctor, although I guess for legal reasons, he's not allowed to call himself a foot doctor. When this client acquired a new state-of-the-art laser machine that helps him treat various foot ailments, he wanted a new brochure to tell everyone about it. And rightly so. It was a great addition to his clinic. It was a state-of-the-art machine that was new to the industry and making big strides. However, the way he wanted to spread the word was all wrong. He sent me the copy for the brochure that he wrote himself, text that included all sorts of technical information about his new laser, information that was full of jargon that only other chiropodists would understand and find interesting. Not to mention, he was using all the medically accurate or scientific terms for all these foot ailments, even though there are more common terms that the general public calls. For example, if I told you that someone was suffering from onychomycosis, you probably have no idea what they're suffering from. But if I was to tell you that they have toenail fungus, now you have a clear picture of what it is. So he wasn't taking his clients into consideration. He was writing it the way he would think it should be written. Now, I could have taken that provided information, designed a beautiful looking brochure for him that would have ultimately failed. It would have failed because his target market, people with foot problems, would have been confused by the jargon he was using and would have ignored, or at least not understood, the benefits that this new laser machine could bring them. So instead of just designing what was provided to me, I sat down with him to discuss not what the laser does, how it works, or the technology behind it, but how it benefits his patients, what it means as far as their treatments go, how it'll speed up the healing process, requiring fewer and shorter visits, how it's safer than the older traditional methods for treating the different foot conditions. All of this stuff was important to his clients, and it was information they could understand and realize the benefits from. So we eliminated the jargon and explained it in an easy to understand terms why people suffering from the various foot problems should book an appointment with him. And you know what? After distributing his brochures to doctors' offices and clinics around the area, he saw a spike in new patients calling about his new laser treatment. And I'm convinced that replacing the jargon with easily understood copy is what made that project a success. Now, if you're a long-time listener of the podcast, you may remember a similar story I had with another client who was running a beauty spa. And she had purchased a similar story. She had purchased some sort of laser-type device that did, if I remember correctly, was microdermabrasion is what this machine treated. And I don't remember what that is, but it was the same thing. She wanted to share all sorts of information about this great machine that her clients didn't care about. It didn't matter what wavelength the laser projected at or how efficient it was on power and all that stuff. What the patient cared about was what benefits were in it for them. So 2 different clients, very similar stories. But your job as a designer is to ensure that the client is thinking about their project from their target's point of view. It doesn't matter what the client thinks or what the client likes, just as long as it appeals to their target market. And of course, it's not always easy to convince them of this. Trust me, I know. I've been dealing with clients for over 30 years. And one of the hardest conversations I have is trying to get them to let go on what they think is right and convincing them that they need to start thinking from their client's perspective. Now, here's a little something that you can try if your client's giving you a hard time about it. Ask the client to imagine, say, a grade schooler had been asked to do a research project on their brochure, their website, or whatever it is you're designing for them. Ask them to imagine that with the information they provided you, do they think a grade schooler will understand it enough to get a good grade on their paper? If not, then they should consider changing the wording of their message. Now, inevitably, what clients will say in this case is, well, the target market they're going after isn't grade schoolers. These are adults they're going after. Well, if that's the case, remind them that the global literacy rate indicates that 49% of the global population have a basic or below basic reading skill level. And in the USA, that number is actually 52%. It's above the global average. Now, only 12% of the global population read at a grade 9 or 10 level. And that's the global population, but it's actually the same number in the US. 12% of the United States read at a grade 9 or 10 level or below. And only 2% of the world population reads at a grade 11 level and up. Now, I'll include a link to the article that I got all these numbers from in the show notes for this episode at resourcefuldesigner.com/episode 217. But what I'm saying here is people have a hard enough time comprehending what it is they read that you shouldn't make it harder for them, more complicated, by adding jargon to the mix. Now, of course, just to reiterate here, this study that I read, this with all these percentages, that's not reading fiction or stuff like that. This is reading manuals and instructions and learning stuff and being able to comprehend it that way. So when you take that into consideration, yes, the numbers start to make a little bit more sense than just people reading, because there's a lot of people that read novels and fiction and all that, which is not the same as reading a tech manual. Which, when it comes down to it, a lot of the websites and brochures that we design can fall into that sort of category. They're instructional. So jargon should never be used. Now, there are some exceptions. Here's one that I went through. I recently built a new website for an engineering company who builds control stations for factories, hospitals, hydro dams, airports, etc. Basically, any huge building that needs to be operated electronically from a smaller location, they build the whole system to control it. Or at least that's how I understood it. Again, when he explained it to me, he was using all sorts of terminology that went over my head. I didn't understand, but I didn't need to in order to build his website. Now, it turns out that this client didn't require a website to attract new clients. Turns out that there's very few companies in the world who provide the service that they do, and those that are in the industry, those that would be hiring out this sort of work, already know who they are. So they're not trying to attract more clients this way. The reason they wanted a website was for recruitment. They operate all over the country. I believe they operate all over the world. And they said finding skilled and capable engineers to work for them is the problem that they're facing. So in their case, we purposely used all sorts of jargon that only the most qualified candidates would understand. And they said since they launched this new website, they've seen an increase in the quality of resumes they receive. Instead of receiving hundreds of unqualified people, they're now receiving dozens of people that all of them would be a good fit for the company. So here's a case where actually the opposite held true. Jargon was actually beneficial in weeding out the undesirable candidates. But in most cases, jargon should be saved for conversations amongst your peers. When you're talking to your clients, you need to make a conscious effort to minimize the jargon you use. Or at least if you're going to use jargon, explain it in terms your clients will understand. And make sure you ask them. Tell them that it's okay to ask questions. After all, there's no such thing as a dumb question if it's posed by the uninformed. So help your clients out, take care of them, and they'll be much more loyal to you. And what more can you ask for in a client? Now, I would love to know what you thought of today's topic. If you want to leave a comment, head on over to resourcefuldesigner.com/episode 217, the show notes page where you can leave a comment there. So thank you very much. Before I go, I want to remind you about the resource of the week, which was coolers.co, a great website. I've been using them for years for creating color palettes for all my projects. And once again, that's coolers.co. And of course, Katie and Sierra and myself and everyone else in the Resourceful Designer community would love to have you as a member. If you're interested in signing up or just learning more, visit resourcefuldesigner.com/community. So that's it for me this week. I look forward to fooling around with my laptop, seeing what sort of things I can do with it. Finally, it's going to be one of the nicest weekends this summer so far. I'll be sitting out on my back deck, testing out my laptop. And I hope you have a wonderful weekend or week, depending on when you're listening to this as well. Until next time, I am Mark DeCote, wishing you all the best with your graphic design business. And as always, reminding you to stay creative.
Thanks for listening to the Resourceful Designer Podcast at resourcefuldesigner.com.